Well, what I'd like to do is go through basic background on end-user experience and why we believe it is the key to how IT organizations are going to view IT in the future, and in regards to the health of the infrastructure. So we'll go to the next slide. The reality is people are increasingly mixing private and business use of IT. Where it was once easy and recommended to separate business and private IT use, the worlds are colliding both at the end user and at the application level. Some may be adamant that the barrier must exist between work and private. As a baby boomer, I can tell you it's very difficult for me to actually mix those two worlds. But as I talk to the younger generation entering the workforce, the division between how private devices are used in aid of the business and vice versa is prolific, and it's actually a common trait. So this means that the products and new approaches to managing IT need to be introduced that give visibility into what the end user are actually doing, where they are using IT from, and what devices they are using to access their applications. So we move to the next slide. So the idea is that the ability to monitor the end user has been a constant focus. In the past, it's been the ambition of the IT organization to get visibility into what the end user are actually doing. But the tools that are provided give different viewpoints, and the organizations that look at the end user look at them with different lenses. So the infrastructure monitoring tools, for example, provide an uptime statistic, and as long as the infrastructure is up and running, then the assumption is that the end users are working and happy. The application performance monitoring tools, APM tools, provide response times, and that gives the ability to say, well, the end users are getting the responses they need from the applications, so therefore they're happy. And then, of course, there's a service desk, which remains ultimately the main gauge which most corporations are looking at, understanding their end users. But it really provides just the ouches and the issues. It's like going to a doctor and asking them, so how well is the planet today? And he says, well, from what I can see, everybody looks pretty sick. So you've really got to look at this from the ability to say that the end users are actually having a good experience or a poor experience. So it's more holistic in its view. But the trouble is, the corporations that want to be able to look at this, when you look at those three types of technologies, the infrastructure tools, the APM tools, and the service desks, it's very difficult to bring all that together in a real-time fashion to say whether the end users are actually benefiting from IT usage or not. So to look at that from a data center specific is also saying everything that they're using today is actually only coming from one particular source. And as the cloud infrastructure and as the diverse ways that a mobile device are being used is showing, it is rarely the case that they go for one source for applications. So the end user monitoring is really changing. And it goes to the activity monitoring area. So end user activity monitoring looks at it from the end user. What exactly are they doing? No matter where they are, which is a really important understanding, the number of applications they are using, so you're not looking at one application, you're looking at their overall experience, and the source with which the applications or devices are used shouldn't be actually built in. It's something that you says, if I'm monitoring the end user, it's irrelevant what they're actually sourced the applications are coming from. I now need to understand what they're using, even if the applications that they may be using are local to their device. So if we move on. So the current applications performance monitoring area, when you look at APM today, it looks at two areas of focus. There's the back-end data center communication layers, which gives you the ability to understand the relationship between the databases, the servers, the middleware, etc. And then there's the front end, which gives you the ability to do the transactional communication between the data center and the end user. And the art form really is to bring both those areas together, where the back-end environment is actually supportive of the front-end environment and vice versa. So no matter what the issue that may be occurring or the performance degradation, you can identify it. But as I've already mentioned, the end users don't always get their information and their applications from one particular source. So to actually get a coherent view requires the traditional data center-centric approach to be expanded into much more of a holistic, how does the end user actually use IT, and what, irrespective of, as I say, where the source of the application is. So increasingly, IT service degradation is really looked at how people are experiencing IT. So IT organizations today are trying to understand what's the overall satisfaction, and it very rarely comes from the service desk. but the service desk can be something that is enhanced to a point where you're now looking at it in a much more holistic, easy to understand way. For example, the service management environment today is focused on ticketing and end user activity. What if you could actually monitor the environment where you're looking at the service management tool becoming more of a business management tool? So now you're not only looking at the issues occurring, but the IT service desk actually gets information around how they're experiencing IT generally. So it's more of a thermometer of what people are doing and not necessarily just a way to report issues. So even at the basic level, the experience is tracked against sets of service levels which the service desk is monitoring. The service desk is made aware of end user activity and experience no matter where the applications are used. And the end user activity is available for playback. So you can actually see what the end users have actually been doing to give them much better root cause capabilities. And obviously you can fix the issue and be much more in line with what they were doing before the issue occurred. And then service manager can also analyze the end user experience, the devices being used, their location, etc. Then, of course, you're moving on to a much broader area of mobile device management. Of course, it would be much easier if everybody got logged in on one device within the VPN and you can monitor that very specific device. But mobility is more around the people more than the devices they're using. So irrespective of what I use when I first wake up in the morning, if I want to access email, I may be using my phone. If I go to my iPad, I then might go to my desktop or my laptop. Those, to me, are seamless interactions with one application called email, whereas IT will look at that as multiple instances of engagement using different types of devices. So the approach is to monitor the end user, understand what they're doing, irrespective of what devices are being used. So the ability to manage mobility, again, is around the mobility of the end user, not necessarily the mobility of the devices. So if you are monitoring the mobility of the end user, you can actually work out whether they're getting good responses based upon the fact that they're using an iPhone from Grand Central Station, or they might be getting a poor response using an iPad from an airport. So you can get much more granular detail on how to support the end user just based upon knowledge of how the applications are being experienced at the endpoint, and not have to worry or be too concerned about how the actual application itself is performing. So if you monitor the application, everything looks cool. But if you're monitoring the application from the end user perspective, then possibility is that they're using a device or a mechanism that may not make their experience a good one. And therefore, that's got to be understood. We're going to move to the next slide. So this is just a general quick introduction on how this environment is moving. The end user is becoming much more of a focus area for IT. IT and the business are very closely linked, and most organizations, when they look at the business, are really looking at the application-centric environment. But ironically, it's the end users that provide much more input into how well IT is being provided to the business. These are the people who fundamentally have to run the applications that the business uses. So actually keeping an understanding of how the end user is interacting with IT is a much better understanding about how the business is being supported by IT. And as I say, as the new environments appear where you are looking at mobility, a new generation of people joining the industry who have less understanding and less need to divide their personal, their social, and their work lives, the commonality is that they're going to be using devices and methods to access the business, etc. And you want to be able to make sure that you can understand exactly how the IT that has been provided is benefiting them in regards to their business practices. So that's a way that the business can be monitored purely by looking at cutting through the red tape, not looking at an application at a time, but looking at the end user, and then bringing it back into the IT infrastructure where it's integrated with the application performance monitoring tools. It can also be integrated with the service management technologies. And of course, if you have a mobile initiative, a bring your own device type of capability, monitoring the end user enables you to understand what is being used, how it's being used, when it's being used. And so that is a very key piece of information that needs to be brought in when judging how well is the IT organization supporting the business.